Throughout the Middle Ages, there were several events that attracted attention both inside and outside the academic world. Perhaps the most controversial of these were the Crusades. While their legacy and repercussions tend to be manipulated for various purposes, the purpose of this video is to synthesize some key concepts that led to the emergence of this phenomenon. To understand the rise of the Crusades, we must take into account the social and political circumstances in which Western Europe found itself. In terms of foreign policy, the Christianization of the Magyars and the Vikings helped to stabilize borders that were once a powder keg. In addition, the decline of Islamic powers in the Mediterranean had to be taken into account. In Spain, the Andalusian Caliphate collapsed, favoring the advance of the Christian kings, while the Normans expanded into Sicily. On the other hand, the consolidation of feudalism in Western Europe should be taken into account. In short, through this system, a clientelistic network was woven in which the nobles obtained the exploitation of rents and land in exchange for military service. The search for new lands to conquer made it possible to extend this network and even to improve their fortunes. It is not surprising that a great part of the components of this First Crusade were nobles or princes instead of kings, as we will see later on. We must also take into account the religious factor. Although war and violence in itself was sinful, there was the notion of just war that was already reflected in the work of St. Augustine in the 5th century. In this case, war became just if the enemy to be defeated was a threat to Christianity. With this idea, it was easier for the Pope to bring Christendom together in a common cause to confront Islam and eventually other enemies of the faith. In this way, he would be able to rise as a rebellious and perhaps political authority, since it was in his own interest to make himself stand out above other Christian leaders, especially after the Schism of the East in 1054, which meant the definitive breach between the Christians of the West and the East. Thus, in the year 1095, Pope Urban II in the Council of Clermont declared the Holy War against the infidels who occupy the holy places. The casus belli was to help the Byzantine Emperor Alexius Comnenus, who was overwhelmed by the Seljuk advance after the Byzantine defeat at Manzikert, 1071. For this reason, Urban II urged Christian leaders to take the vow of pilgrimage and form a large army to succor the Christians of the East. The First Crusade went through several waves. The first wave was the Crusade of the Poor. Although Pope Urban II called for the First Crusade in 1096, a preacher known as Peter the Hermit gathered a mass of 40,000 people made up of peasants, artisans, serfs, women, children, low-ranking nobles, and inexperienced knights to fight against the Ishmaelites. This crusade led to a series of massacres of Jews and to a confrontation between the French knights led by Walter Gautier and the knights of King Koloman of Hungary, who were escorting them out of their territory when the Gautier soldiers turned against them, killing about 4,000 Hungarians. After a quarter of the Crusaders died on their journey to Constantinople, Emperor Alexius Comnenus decided to embark the surviving Crusaders across the Bosporus to reduce looting in his domain. After arriving in Asia Minor, internal disputes caused the army to split into two groups. The Seljuks, much better prepared militarily, massacred what was left of the Crusade of the Poor. The survivors were enslaved, although some fared better. Peter the Hermit managed to escape the massacre and returned to Constantinople to join the second wave, the so-called Crusade of the Princes. The Crusade of the Princes was composed of members of the feudal nobility, being much better organized than the first wave. It is estimated that it was composed of 30,000 to 35,000 Crusaders divided into four main groups. The first group was commanded by Godfrey of Bouillon, along with his brothers Baldwin and Eustace, who led a group of knights of Lorraine and Flemish origin. They reached Constantinople through Germany and Hungary. The second group was commanded by Hugo of Vermandois, brother of King Philip I of France, Stephen II of Blois, brother-in-law of King William II of England, Count Robert II of Flanders, and Robert II of Normandy. The third group, composed of Sicilian Normans, was led by Bohemond of Taranto and his nephew Tancred. They joined the rest of the Normans of the second group and took a sea route from Bari to Constantinople. The fourth group was composed of Occitan knights led by Raymond of Toulouse and Adhemar of Le Puy, a papal legate and spiritual leader of the expedition who headed for Constantinople through Slovenia and Dalmatia. This group was a larger contingent composed of about 8,500 infantrymen and 1,200 cavalry. The second wave of Crusaders arrived in Constantinople poorly supplied, a situation that Alexius Komnenos decided to take advantage of. The emperor offered the Crusaders to supply them with food and equipment for the campaign in exchange for their loyalty in conquering lands. He wanted to prevent the Franks, the term by which the Crusaders were known in Eastern sources, from taking the land for themselves. Alexius, despite being encouraged by Raymond of Toulouse to take the reins of the campaign, decided to stay in Constantinople because of the risk of internal conflicts. He delegated the command of the campaign to his general Tatikios, whose first objective was the reconquest of the city of Nicaea. The city was part of the Sultanate of Rum and was ruled by Khalij Arslan I. When the Crusaders launched the attack on Nicaea, Arslan was on the military campaign in central Anatolia, delegating the defense of the city to his relatives. The conditions of the siege were not favorable for the Crusaders. Their forces were dwindling as the defenders received supplies via a lake, as they were unable to blockade the city by sea. However, the tables turned favorably for the Crusaders. Arslan, who returned to the city to help the defenders, was defeated by the Franks. Finally, after several months of fighting, Khalij Arslan I decided to surrender Nicaea, not to the Crusaders, but to Emperor Alexius. Fearing that the Crusaders would sack the city, the Byzantine emperor went ahead with a secret pact with the Turkish leader. Thus, on June 19, 1097, the Crusaders discovered in the morning that the emperor had taken the city. After the siege of Nicaea, the next objective was the city of Antioch, of great strategic value since it was on the way between Constantinople and Jerusalem. The Crusaders arrived on October 20, 1097, at which time they began to besiege Antioch. Despite encircling the city by land and sea, conditions were very difficult. Hunger spread among the besiegers, who were forced to seek supplies far from the city. On the other hand, cracks in the leadership of the Crusaders came to light. The Byzantines abandoned the campaign, apparently because Bohemond planned to take over the city and was plotting to kill Tatikios. So, while Raymond intended to keep his word to the Byzantines and return the city to the Byzantines, Bohemond wanted to take control of Antioch. But internal disagreements had to be put aside as a large army composed of various Seljuk factions was approaching to attack the Crusaders. Time was against the Crusaders, who rushed to storm the city before reinforcements arrived. Bohemond established close ties with an influential member of the city named Firuz, who wanted revenge against the Seljuks. Firuz was able to open one of the gates, allowing the Crusaders to pass inside the city. Antioch would then be in the hands of the Crusaders, except for the citadel where the governor's son was located. The craving for booty led the Crusaders to sack the city and massacre a large part of the city's inhabitants. The Seljuk army, whose one of its main leaders was Kerboga, arrived in the vicinity of the city ready to wipe out the Franks. Despite being decimated after the recent siege, the Crusaders had high morale. According to historians of the time, the Crusaders found what they interpreted as a relic. It was the Holy Lance. True or not, the news spread like wildfire and encouraged the Crusaders to leave the walls to face the Seljuks on the battlefield. Kerboga, underestimating the decimated Franks, allowed his enemy to mass in hopes of sweeping them all away in a single engagement. The battle took place on June 28, 1098, and ended in victory for the Crusader army. As a consequence, Bohemond took control of the city, bringing about the Principality of Antioch. After taking Antioch, the Crusaders marched towards Jerusalem. Along the way, they expanded their domains and reached peace agreements with some local leaders who gave them supplies to avoid looting. The Fatimids, who ruled Jerusalem, did not understand the purpose of the crusade. They wanted to take advantage of the common rivalry with the Seljuks, but the negotiations did not prosper. The Franks arrived in Jerusalem in June 1099, ready to besiege it. Of the initial army, only 12,000 men remained, including 1,500 cavalrymen. The history of Nicaea in Antioch repeated itself. Hunger and thirst largely consumed the besiegers, while defenders had supplies to resist. But with the arrival of the Genoese Crusaders led by William Imbriacus, the situation would be unblocked. Thanks to the siege towers, the Crusaders were able to take the walls. The Crusaders were carried away by their frenzy and massacred a large part of the population, mainly Muslims and Jews. Although the more fortunate were able to pay a ransom to save their lives, thus Godfrey of Bouillon took control of the city and took the title of Defender of the Holy Sepulchre. After his death a year later, his dominions passed into the hands of his brother Baldwin, who crowned himself King Baldwin I of Jerusalem, a kingdom that, despite papal attempts to establish a theocracy, would be similar to European secular monarchies. After taking Jerusalem and prevailing in the Battle of Ascalon, 1099, many of the surviving Crusaders returned to their homelands, while others stayed to defend what they had conquered. A consequence of the First Crusade, Crusader States were established in the Holy Land. The most prominent is undoubtedly the aforementioned Kingdom of Jerusalem, although other Crusader leaders founded their own state. An example of this was Bohemond of Tarentum, with the Principality of Antioch, or Raymond of Toulouse with the County of Tripoli, or the County of Edessa, founded by Baldwin of Bologna before being crowned King of Jerusalem. However, the repercussions of this pilgrimage were not only territorial. It also had social repercussions among the peoples affected by the Crusades, as well as mental or religious ones. The repercussions reached other corners beyond the Holy Land, such as the Iberian Peninsula or the Baltic. It led to confrontation not only between Christians and Muslims, but also with polytheist peoples and even against other Christians. In short, this crusade was only the first of a phenomenon that would mark much of the Middle Ages. That's it for today, but don't worry, we're just getting started. Thanks for joining this historical ride, and get ready for more fun facts and stories in the next video. See you soon, time travelers.